Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We're broadcasting across all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. Broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. And as always on TikTok, the best viewing experience is at UK A Force for Good on YouTube or on Facebook. Folks, please tell us where you're coming from. Please tell us where you're watching from. Please tell us what's on your mind tonight. Because since we last spoke to you a mere 7 days ago, we have a new Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And who would have thought that was going to happen in such a short period of time? Now, I'm sure many people will have their own views on Rishi Sunak for and against. And from our perspective as pro-UK British Unionists, our concern is, will he stand up for the Union? That's our concern. We know that he'll be busying himself with the economy. He'll have lots of opinions on those sorts of things. But will he be the man to take on Nicola Sturgeon? What are his strengths? What are likely to be his weaknesses? Please tell us your considered opinion on that, and we will read them out. We're also going to be talking about the Scottish National Party and its alternative to the UK, which is, of course, membership of the European Union, the EU, and we're going to be pointing out how that's a contradiction in terms. Somebody on TikTok says, is India colonising us through Rishi Sunak? Some people might have an opinion on that or not. He certainly is the first Indian Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, if you weren't already aware of that particular matter. Nicola Sturgeon put out that he was the first ethnic minority. Well, sort of not really correct, because Benjamin Disraeli was Jewish, or he was a converted Jew, so some people claim him as the first ethnic minority member. And so Nicola Sturgeon actually deleted her tweet, the first time she's probably ever deleted a tweet in her life, but she should have known that, really. But clearly she wasn't as au fait with British history as the rest of us are, which is perhaps not surprising. And hi to Kat. Hello, says Kat. What if the Conservative Party does so badly in the next general election that the SNP becomes the official opposition to Labour in the House of Commons? That's a scary thought, eh? Well, that would be an unusual thing. It certainly would. And we'd just have to deal with that, because after all, the SNP is a British party in the British Parliament, ideally representing there all the British people. At least that's the theory. Harry says, the Conservative Party is officially called the Conservative and Unionist Party, so I hope he keeps the union up and strengthens it. He absolutely has to. Let's hope that he has got good people around him who are telling him that. And Alan says, love him or hate him, he needs time to get the Tories back up in the polls. How much time does he need? Well, the very last time they could possibly have a general election is in the end of January 2025, believe it or not, although it's more likely to be sometime in 2024. Paul says, Sunak's first question to Sturgeon should be, what are you doing to help bring the country together? That should always be the focus. Exactly. And I can imagine Sturgeon would be absolutely flummoxed by that particular answer. Crikey. By that particular question, would she have an answer? She would have to say, no, I'm not doing anything to keep the United Kingdom together. I'm only here to divide it. Yes, she needs to be exposed on that divisive rhetoric. And Jimmy says, good luck, Rishi. Please look after all the Scots that Sturgeon has abandoned. And Jimmy has a profile pic there of the final scene in Ice Cold in Alex, which is, of course, one of the classic British war films. I saw that Ice Cold in Alex last year. I watched it again, and I thought, I bet that wouldn't get made today, because it was really quite well balanced. You know, it treated the Germans as human beings, and I doubt that in today's modern world such a nuanced view would be permitted. Who knows? Kennedy Roger says, it won't be me nor my family voting for Sturgeon and her clowns, who I hope fail miserably, along with the poor records they have got. Kenny says, what is the story regarding Derek Mackay at the Ferries inquiry? And I'm not sure what you mean there about that, Kenny. Don't have any update on it, if that's what you're referring to. And Emma raises an interesting point that Rishi wants the World Economic Foundation social credit system. And I know that him and Liz Truss and others have been getting quite pelters for being supporters and members of the WEF, the World Economic Foundation or Forum. WEF. I saw quite a good meme this week that said Westminster, WEF Minster, Westminster, giving the impression that everybody who gets elected there seems to be a WEF stooge. Well, hopefully, we have to hope for the best in all these guys, and we have to hope that people like Rishi, whatever you think of him, has got the best interests of all the country at heart. However, the Tory party has been making some fundamental problems of late, which basically I'll just get to. But before I do that, I just want to remind people that we are organising to be at Holyrood, outside Holyrood Parliament, on the day that the Supreme Court makes its announcement about whether or not the SNP can hold a second referendum. Now, the Supreme Court will not give us any notice on that. They'll simply announce it that morning. So we'll only find out about it that day, whenever that day may be. It's likely to be between now and the middle of December. So we're compiling a list of people who have said that they're interested in being told about this and that they might be able to join us at very short notice outside Holyrood sometime between now and the middle of December. So if that's you, and if you have not already contacted us on this matter, please do send us an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk and tell us that you want to be involved outside Holyrood. It will just be short notice. You'll get the text or the email or the Facebook message that day, that morning, and we'll be rallying that afternoon, mid to late afternoon on that day. All we know is it will be a weekday. So if you think you might be in a position to do that, if you'd like to be kept in touch, please do send an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk and just say something like, count me in for the Holyrood activism. Count me in as possibly there. And we'll make a note of that, and we will tell you on the day it happens. And we're providing the posters and all the flags as usual. And we'll be there because the Nats are also going to be there, okay? They're also going to be there. And they're going to be there having a cry and moan pity party in order to cry and moan in front of the television cameras, in order basically to give the rest of the world a bad impression of Scotland. So we have to give a good impression of Scotland because the eyes of the world will be watching. So we want as many of our people to be there as possible. Adam says, if only there were unionist activists in London as well. Well, we certainly know of a handful of people in London who are supporters, but you would think that in a city that size there would be some sort of pro-UK organisation for the union. There's certainly enough Scots down there. Alan says, has anyone heard more about the court case? Well, what happens is you're talking about the ferry court case. I don't know, I haven't heard anything about the ferry court case. George says, guaranteed if there was another referendum, Sturgeon will try and fix it, and Anglo-Scots will demand a vote if it is granted. That's all the Scots living in England. Well, I can perfectly understand that they should be involved as much as possible. Marcus says, talking of the Scottish Parliament building, it is the ugliest and most embarrassing architecture I've ever seen. It ruins Edinburgh city landscape. It's near Holyrood Palace, like a big middle finger. Costs millions anyway to maintain it. Harvey asks, what's our opinion on the Reform Party? We don't have an opinion on any party, actually, for good or for bad. We just hope that they're for the United Kingdom staying together, and as far as we know, the Reform Party is certainly for that, which is a good thing. But beyond that, we don't actually know very much about the Reform Party. George says, I'm a Scot living in Kent. Long live the Union. 100%. I have demanded from my MP that we get a vote. Will she bring it up in Parliament? It'd be good if she did. It'd be good if she did bring something like that up in Parliament, or at least challenge the SNP why they don't want Scots, or indeed anybody else living in any other part of the UK, to be involved. And Robert is of the opinion there that Nicola is an attention seeker who knows she will lose. Indeed, and she'd probably be quite happy, Robert, if she didn't get a referendum, because she certainly doesn't want to lose it. Stuart says the town of Corby is 50% Scots. I've heard that. I just want to talk briefly about the state of the Conservative Party and how it's got into this situation. Okay, because you really have to think, how on earth have they done this? And really what it is the British people did it to the Tories. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that in 2016, the Conservative Party, other than a few backbenchers, the Conservative Party wanted to stay in the European Union. David Cameron wanted to stay in, and all the big hitters and all the cabinet, apart from one or two, and all the media, and especially here in Scotland, throughout the United Kingdom, everybody, the politicians and media, wanted to stay in the EU. They had the referendum, and guess what happened? The people voted to leave, and that threw the Tories into a tailspin from which they have not yet recovered. And this is why we're seeing this chaos. It's not because of Brexit per se. It's because of what that result did to a party that did not want to leave the EU, and that had huge numbers of people in its political establishment who wanted to stay in the EU, and who had got to where they had got through in politics and everywhere else through allegiance to the EU. And as a consequence of that, the Tories were in absolute chaos from which they are still trying to recover. Okay, and also because they misunderstood, to the extent that they were for Brexit, they misunderstood the vote for Brexit. The vote for Brexit, and this chap here, Matt Goodwin, has summarised it extremely well. The Conservatives may be about to choose their last ever Prime Minister. Well, that's certainly that's debatable, but he points out here that, as I tried to tell people at the time, only 5 to 10% of the Conservative voters shared Liz Truss's Davos on the Thames vision of what Brexit is all about. Davos on the Thames. What's meant by that? Davos is one of these international organisations like the WEF, and they're all about globalism. It's globalists who run that particular show. And as he says, my own polling shows most of the Brexit voters who rallied around the Conservative Party in 2017 and 2019 have never seen the project as about deregulating the economy or eroding workers' rights or removing caps on bankers' bonuses or putting the City of London on steroids or pushing the pedal down on even more mass immigration. If anything, this was the vision of Britain they were trying to escape from. That is so true. Instead, most saw Brexit as being about national renewal a rejection of the broken social and economic model that has dominated the country for the past 50 years. Absolutely, absolutely. And the Tories, the Conservative Party, has still not fully grasped that. And Liz Truss, I don't think, did grasp that with her more immigration policies and with her policies to to basically give free rein to the city and to the banks and to those sorts of institutions. And that's not really authentic conservatism. That's sort of neoconservatism, free market conservatism, which is not going right back to what you would call authentic conservatism, which was much more nationally based, much more anti-globalist. But we have not had an anti-globalist running a major political party now since goodness knows when. You'd really have to go back quite a while to even find one, and I can't even think of a post-war one that would fall into my particular analysis of that. But certainly in the last 20 years, we have not had that. So that's why the Tories are still in disarray. And so what we might be witnessing is the final throes of a party that ended up being unable to resolve the tensions within itself. Who knows? Who knows how this will all go? And that's the interesting thing about politics, is that it can raise up all sorts of strange things. But very often people get what they deserve in politics. You know, if you've misjudged the national mood, you can suffer for that, and your party can suffer for it. And is that what we're facing at the moment? Is that what we're witnessing, as it were, in these awful moments of the Conservative Party meltdown? So we'll see what happens at the next general election. But certainly it's perfect weather right now for the Scottish National Party to make hay, to make independence hay, while the sun of chaos at Westminster shines. And the Telegraph is a good correspondent, the Scottish correspondent Alan Cochrane, and he summed this up. He goes, "All unionists want from number 10 is a competent government that compares favourably with the often shambolic administration headed by the First Minister. And on present evidence, we're not getting that." He says, "All we beleaguered Scottish unionists really ask for is a competent UK government that has a decent standing in the world, economically and diplomatically. You know, one that can pay its way and is listened to by other leaders when times get tough. Sadly, that has proved an impossible ask as far as the current Tory government is concerned. An impossible ask. Isn't that so?" And you know, Scottish nationalists will say, "Well, Alistair, if you Scottish unionists realise how awful the Conservative Party has been of late, then, you know, why don't you become a Scottish nationalist? Because everything in the garden's going to be rosy once we have our Scottish nationalist independent sovereign state." That's not correct, okay? Now, I know that there are some people who will vote for independence because they simply see the government as being incompetent, the British government as being incompetent. And I realised this. Back in 1997, I met a Scottish nationalist who was extremely impassioned, and I asked him what made him become a Scottish nationalist. And he said, right, he goes that he was so outraged that back in 1965, when the British government cancelled the TSR-2 fighter programme, and he was talking to me at great length about what a great fighter the TSR-2 fighter jet was, Mach speeds, payloads, manoeuvrability, the whole thing. And he was like, the TSR-2 is the bee's knees as far as fighter jets are concerned. But because of typical British government incompetence, the whole thing came to an end, and the programme had to get cancelled. And that made him so enraged that he goes, right, I'm becoming a Scottish nationalist as a consequence of that. Now, I haven't met that guy since, and I don't know, and that was in 1997. And the TSR-2 programme was cancelled in 1965. So for 32 years, that had been bugging him so much. And it had not been enough to intervening circumstances had not been enough to change his mind, that you'd get a better competent government, especially as far as fighter jet creation is concerned, under the SNP. Well, as we know, under the SNP you can't even get a ferry built, let alone try to assemble an aircraft. Anyway, so I understand that if you have an incompetent British government, that can certainly mess up the Union. But we Unionists don't love the United Kingdom because of the government in charge, whether that's Labour or Tory or whatever. We have to presume that the government is going to fall short. We love the United Kingdom for solid principles, okay, for the principles of solidarity among all the people of the British Isles, for the principle of unity for all the people of the British Isles, and because we know that we're stronger together. And we covered this in an article which we wrote, which was called British Unionism, 12 Fundamentals of Britain's Core Ideology. And you can find that in the comment threads. And that sums up the fundamental principles, the solid ground upon which we stand and why we like the Union. And we're not going to fall out with that because of incompetent government, because you'll get incompetent government wherever you roam, I'm afraid, because this is the thing that Scottish nationalists don't realise. We're all human beings. We're all fallen in that sense. None of us are perfect, and even in a perfect... There is no perfect society or governmental system, okay? So you have to stand on solid ground rather than the day-to-day passing things, such as incompetent governments, which quite literally, as we've seen, are here today and gone tomorrow, or rather here 7 days ago, and now we've got an entirely different one. So stand on principle, not on the shifting sands of policies that you don't like. That's how we deal with that. That's how we deal with that question when people say, how can you be a unionist when the British governments are so incompetent? We build on permanent things, not on passing things. And we also wrote an article as well recently called A Unionist Response to When Westminster Fails. And you'll also find that in the comment threads as well, where we make the points that I've just made to you. Paul sums it up when he says, Sturgeon is not Scotland and Sunak is not Britain. That's true. Christopher says, the SNP supporters often reach for facile short-term reasoning to justify their support. They don't see the big picture. It's the big picture that we're concentrating on, the big picture. And as Catherine says, I mean, they need to, as far as incompetent government is concerned, they need to look at the SNP. And Christopher says, it's a perfect time for the return of one nation Toryism. That's the phrase I think I was reaching for, that can be harnessed to defeat the SNP by rolling out this vision across the whole of the UK. And Harvey says, the Conservatives are doomed. They are not a proper right-wing unionist party. They are very centrist, if not left-wing in some areas. And there's certainly... The core of the Tories is metropolitan, cosmopolitan London liberals. That's what the Tories are. And it always amuses me so much when I read the National. And it's as if the Tories are like, stormtroopers from 1930s Germany or something like that. I mean, they're literally the Conservative establishment. And I'm talking about the establishment, I'm not talking about the supporters. The Conservative establishment is the wettest, flabbiest, metropolitan liberal people you will ever find in your life. So I don't know whether this idea of the Tories has been some kind of extreme party. Now, they may be extreme as far as free market capitalism is concerned, but that's not really that's not how the National categorises them. Harry says, it was very much a Thatcherite ideology to leave the EU. I can understand leaving the EU as we went against Brussels at certain times and the allowing of near total freedom of movement within it. And we also, of course, lost relationships with Commonwealth nations and Commonwealth realms as well, and that was a pity. And I'd like to think that can be reharnessed again. But yet, where's the programme for that? Where's the programme? Do the Tories have that kind of programme? And well, we wrote up the programme for them in our magazine here, Do More Together, when we spoke about our British wealth in common. In other words, the British Commonwealth, our British wealth in common. And we put some policies together there to help to rebuild Commonwealth relations. And you can get this magazine, Do More Together, at our shop, and we'll put up the link there for the shop as well. It's time for our On This Day in British History Matters. On This Day in British History Matters. And I just want to talk about this for a little while because, we use the past here at A Force for Good. We use the past as inspiration for the future. We're not looking back with longing for some sort of long lost past. We're not looking to return to those days, because in some ways, some of the days in the past would be pretty bad as well. Rather, we're using the example of people in the past or events in the past, whether examples of bravery or compassion or courage or indomitable spirit or ingenuity or wisdom or leadership, in order to recall to memory those qualities, in order to invoke them in the present, in order to make them a living thing again in the now, so that we may be guided by them as we move forward into the future. Because you get some people who go, oh, guys like you're just living in the past, it's just nostalgic. No, the past is there for a reason, and we learn from the past, we look to the past, and we use the past to invoke good things in the present. And we're also known, of course, for talking about our 5,000-year union. We trace the unity of the British people going far, far back in time, not just to 1707 and the union of the parliaments, but right back to, and not just right back to the union of the crowns in 1603, but going even further back than that. And today we're going to go right back to this day, 26th of October in 889. And this was the day that Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, passed away. And we've got a picture of King Alfred here that we'll put up. And he's noted for successfully defending the Kingdom of Wessex against the Viking attempt at conquest. And by the time of his death, he had become the dominant ruler in England, and he's credited with bringing together the various kingdoms of England into one kingdom. And he's given the epitaph King Alfred the Great, one of only two kings to be styled the Great in England, the other being Canute. And so this chap there, Alfred, was born in 849, and he died on this day. His body was originally buried in Winchester, and then it was moved north of Winchester to Hyde. And when the abbey was destroyed in 1539 as part of Henry VIII's campaign against that sort of thing, unfortunately we lost the exact location of his grave. But that's his statue there in Winchester, which was erected way back in 1899, designed by Hamo Thornycroft. So that's King Alfred, died on this day. Ryan says, the Union is the United Kingdom. It is the country and kingdom at large, and not an organisation or construct of individual states or nations such as the Commonwealth or the EU. That's correct. We're not like the European Union, which is just really a state. We are an actual nation state. I often find, says Ryan, secessionists don't fully acknowledge or understand this fact. Oh, that's for sure. They do not understand this fact at all. Good. Okay, we can get rid of that contact at A Force for Good. Alan says, any new magazines in the pipeline? Yes, by the end of November, we're hoping that we will have issue number 7 of Union Heart, which will be 15 or 20 busting Indy Myths, and we'll get to a busting Indy Myths in 5 minutes, but I just want to finish the point I was making about the European Union. For the Scottish National Party, independence from the UK, their alternative to independence in the UK is membership of the European Union, and that this is going to be an absolute Achilles heel for them, because it's a complete contradiction in terms, and it's got so many holes in it. And we saw that last week when Nicola Sturgeon showed us, launched a document about Scotland and its economy, which relied heavily upon the European Union and membership of that. And this lady here, Liz Smith, who's an MSP, who's a Tory MSP in the Parliament, goes, the idea that we would be in the EU underpins everything in the SNP's argument, but it's an assumption based on nothing more than wishful thinking. Their sole fig leaf for attempting to rerun a referendum they lost by a decisive margin in 2014 is that Brexit has so-called changed everything. But what they don't mention, of course, is that if they had won, Scotland would instantly have been out of the EU, and for a substantial period of time. And as she points out in this article, which appeared in the Telegraph, we learn absolutely nothing from the SNP's prospectus. In fact, as has also been pointed out by Daniel Johnston, the Scottish Labour's finance and economy spokesman, the SNP plans would leave Scotland isolated and cut off from our biggest trading partner, which is to say the rest of the United Kingdom, making Brexit look like a walk in the park by comparison. Nicola Sturgeon is peddling empty promises and fantasy economics at the expense of jobs and businesses. This plan would see Scotland years in the international wilderness, and a former MSP in the SNP, Alex Neil, said the use of sterling would mean a breakaway Scotland would be unable to join the EU in any case. In this case, there is a clear contradiction between the policy of remaining in sterling while at the same time hoping to join the European Union. It's irreconcilable. Absolutely irreconcilable. And that doesn't properly get brought out. And in defence of that, the SNP's Europe minister, right? They've got a Europe minister who'd be getting a pretty penny, because when you get elevated to cabinet office, so-called, in the SNP, you get tens of thousands of pounds more from the British taxpayer. So this one's been elevated to the Europe minister, and he says, this is the SNP guy, becoming an independent country would ensure the free movement of people and goods to the 27 EU member states, which is a market 7 times bigger than the UK. Well, a market 7 times bigger than the UK, that sounds very impressive, until you understand, as we pointed out here, that while the EU may be 7 times the size of the UK market in theory, in practice, the rest of the UK is the destination for 3 times as many Scottish exports as the EU. Okay, so while the EU may be 7 times the size of the UK market, the UK is the destination for 3 times as many Scottish exports as the EU. So in other words, the rest of the UK is our most important trading partner, and it always will be. And in that sense, while EU membership may have benefited some businesses, most businesses need the rest of the UK, and they need seamless trade with the rest of the UK. And those statistics are from government statistics, the latest that we have at the moment, again mentioned in Do More Together. So what I want to talk about now is busting Indy myths. Busting Indy myths. And we are busting Indy myths on the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly until the Scot Nats see clearly that we're down with the capital A to the AFFG. And this is Busting Indy Myths Part 20. And in this Busting Indy Myths, we're going to address the oft-heard claim that an independent Scotland wouldn't get involved in wars. Now that might seem quite an abstract claim, but you know what? This was a major argument of the Scottish nationalists back in 2014. The idea being that Scotland's alliance with the rest of the United Kingdom means that we're constantly drafted into unwinnable and often apparent unjust conflicts. And back in 2014, the Scottish nationalists and the pro-separatists were making that argument very loudly indeed. It was one of their core arguments: vote for us, get an independent Scotland, and we won't be involved in wars anymore. And they could make it at that time because it was after the Iraq War, and the Iraq War had been opposed by Alex Salmond. Now, the Iraq War was between 2003 and 2011, and the SNP came into power once the Iraq War had started by 2007. And it was a powerful argument at the time, and it went further than just simply a criticism of the Iraq War. It heavily implied that an independent Scotland would not get involved in any wars in the future. Now, to address this matter, let's firstly put aside the idea of whether a separate Scottish armed forces outside of what would presumably be a separate English armed forces. Let's put aside whether that could even work within the British Isles. And let's put aside whether or not a form of British armed forces would actually have to continue very much as normal, because that would be the only way that it could work. Let's put aside those two practical considerations. Okay, put aside those practical considerations and just concentrate on the philosophy and ideology of this particular claim that an independent Scotland would mean that Scotland would not get involved in wars. Well, we can answer that fairly easily, because we can answer it by looking at recent history and today's reality. And the answer is that whether or not Scotland got involved, it will depend, as these things always do, on who is in power, what's their ideology, and where do their sympathies lie on the particular matter at hand. And we know this because if we cast our minds back to Thursday, the 16th of January 2003, now you might not remember exactly what happened on that day, but I do remember what happened on that day very clearly, because I suppose it's my job to know these things. But back then, on the 16th of January 2003, the Scottish Parliament voted to endorse Tony Blair's strategy for war with Iraq. Okay? At that time, back in 2003, the Scottish Parliament was controlled by the Labour Party. The First Minister was Jack McConnell. And what happened was that they voted to endorse Tony Blair's line that Saddam Hussein must get rid of his, what were then said to be weapons of mass destruction, or face invasion. And the Scottish Parliament voted by 67 votes to 51 votes to endorse Tony Blair's strategy. Now, while the Scottish Parliament didn't have any authority over the matter of the invasion, it nevertheless put it into record that the Scottish Parliament, speaking on behalf of the Scottish people, was for the potential of war in Iraq at that time. If the condition of Saddam Hussein not getting rid of his weapons of mass destruction was not met. Now, in the fullness of time, of course, Saddam Hussein was not able to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction, just as I am not able to get rid of my fleet of luxury Rolls-Royce cars, or my personal resort in the Bahamas, or my private jet, for the simple reason that I don't have any of those things. But of course, at the end of the day, Saddam Hussein made that argument, was unable to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction, and war ensued. And of course, in the fullness of time, it's been proven that he did not have any weapons of mass destruction. But that doesn't change the point that the Scottish Parliament voted to endorse, essentially, Tony Blair's strategy for war in Iraq. So we know, by looking at history, what can happen as a result. Just because you've got an independent Scotland doesn't mean that the people who are actually occupying the position of MPs in the Parliament are somehow all going to be pacifists who are all going to say, oh no, I'm not going to get involved in that. Now look at the situation today. The SNP and Greens are very pro getting involved. Look at the situation today. The SNP and Greens are very pro getting involved, at least from a distance, in the war in Ukraine. They're absolutely aligned with the UK Conservative government's position on that matter, whatever you may think of the conflict. So right now the SNP Greens are making common cause with the Conservative Party in London on the particular matter of war in the Ukraine. So if we imagine that Scotland was suddenly made independent tomorrow, right now with an SNP Green government, and England was independent with a Tory government, then the two countries would still agree on this matter. And today, within the United Kingdom, if Rishi Sunak, God forbid, declared war on Putin, the SNP and Greens would be right behind him. So what we can say from past history and from the reality right now, and putting aside whether a separate armed forces for Scotland would even be practical, what we can say, what we can accurately deduce from recent history and from the reality right now, is the fact that if Scotland was independent, that would have no bearing in and of itself on the matter of whether Scotland got involved in any external international conflict. What would decide the matter would be, as always, who's in power, what's their ideology, where do their sympathies lie on this particular matter. So it's simply not true to say that an independent Scotland would in and of itself not get involved in international conflict. That's certainly not the experience that we've had if we use the devolved Parliament in Scotland as a guide. Thus endeth Busting Indy Myths Part 20. Alan says, talking about defence, it's impossible to be anti-nuclear and pro-NATO. The nuclear deterrent is their main asset. That's right. Whether or not, you see, could Scotland join NATO? That's another question. Christopher says, again, it's the most simplistic and populist approach by the SNP, totally lacking in knowledge of real politic. That's it, isn't it? There's always going to be real politic that's going to hit reality, whether you like it or not, and you have to make the decisions, and sometimes you have to make decisions that you don't even want to make. Stuart says, why do the Nats turn up with claymores and shields? Is it because they love war? I think it's because they love the fantasy of the idea. I think they like the role-playing. Jimmy says, Alex Neil was the only SNP MSP to speak out against Sturgeon since Margot MacDonald. Alex had a backbone, unlike the rest. Just a little funny. It's not funny, it's actually tragic. that I wanted to raise, and I just wanted to put on the record. Somebody said to us this week, a supporter said, would you do a Facebook profile? You know, you can get these Facebook profiles where around the bottom it says something about what you've done or what you believe in or what charity you're supporting or something like that. And we thought, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll do a Facebook profile for A Force for Good. So I spoke to one of our designers who said, yeah, I'll get on it. Reported back that Facebook are not allowing people to do profiles now unless they're approved organisations and unless they are speaking on 3 particular subjects. In other words, promoting the globalist line on 3 particular subjects. And guess what those 3 particular subjects are that you're only allowed now to make a Facebook profile on? One is the thing that they put, you know, in your arm. The other is regarding voting and not agreeing with certain results. If you don't agree with certain democratic results or whatever, you can't make the Facebook profile. You have to be an organisation that's promoting a particular view of the democratic system. And the third one is, of course, everything to do with the sun and the warming that they talk about. And I'm talking obscurely here because I don't want the algorithms to pick up words that will actually ban this broadcast. So that's the only 3 subjects now. The issue regarding the sun, the issue regarding the thing in your arm, and the issue regarding American elections. If you've got the right opinion on those 3 things, you can make Facebook profiles if you're an approved organisation. But if you want to make a Facebook profile for anything else, you're not allowed to. And as proof, we've got the actual photographs there, which you can put up. And we've had a packed programme tonight, as always. Thank you for all the comments that you sent in, all very wise and correct. Thank you to everybody who was watching on TikTok. Sorry we can't get to everybody's points of view on TikTok, but we do our best on Facebook and on YouTube. And so, folks, we'll be back next Wednesday, which will be November already. Don't forget that the clocks go back this weekend on Saturday night. And in the meantime, it just remains for us to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.